Welcome to today's press review with me, Carmen Cracknell, where I'll be taking a look at how the protest laws in Egypt are affecting the nation and update you on the continuing crisis in Syria. But first, let's take a look at the front pages here in the UK. The Guardian leads its front page with reports on the Governor of the Bank of England reining in the mortgage market as he sought to prevent 5 years of ultra-low interest rates and George Osborne's Help to Buy scheme from fueling a pre-election housing bubble. It also reports on Angola being accused of scapegoating Islam after shutting down most of the country's mosques, and Boris Johnson being accused by Nick Clegg of unpleasant elitism following the London Mayor's comments suggesting that some people will struggle in life because of their low IQs. The Independent leads with an exclusive report which says that British security services handed murdered Russian Alexander Litvinenko a confidential government document that summarised private meetings held with a close ally of Russian President Vladimir Putin. It also features a picture from the Malayan emergency with the headline, "The Dark Arts of Empire," as the paper looks at how Britain systematically destroyed the evidence of years of colonial cruelties. The Daily Telegraph leads its front page, reporting that less than half the people suffering from dementia are being formally diagnosed because doctors fear stigmatising their patients. It also reports on government's call on the big six energy firms to freeze prices until mid-2015 and features a picture of the Duchess of Cambridge attending the Olympics ball, which was held to help the next generation of British sports stars. The Times leads its front page, reporting on new fathers winning the right to take up 50 weeks of paternity leave. It also reports on Boris Johnson urging men to take the threat of prostate cancer seriously by having a test if they are concerned that they're at risk, and pictures Peaches Geldof, who may face contempt charges after tweeting the names of women who let Lost Prophets singer Ian Watkins abuse their babies. Now let's take a look at the top stories in the Middle East. As Syria's continuing crisis deepens, let's take a look at the latest from analysts. Sohaib Anjarini writes for Al-Akhbar asking, did Saudi assassinate opposition leader? As he says the death of Tawhid Brigade Commander Abdul Qadir al-Saleh in mid-November raised many questions as to who was behind it and why it was necessary to remove him at this time. Anjari says that although the airstrike that led to the death of Abdul Qadir al-Saleh was immediately blamed on the regime, there are those within the armed group's inner circle who believe that Saudi Arabia and the United States may have carried out the attack. He adds that two sources from within Tawhid have revealed to Al-Akhbar the details of the assassination, suggesting that it may be connected to the formation of the opposition Islamic Front under Saudi auspices, in addition to Saleh's reported trip to the US. According to these sources, a number of Tawhid's top commanders were holding a meeting in their Aleppo headquarters when they heard the sound of a jet flying overhead. Most of those in the meeting were killed alongside Saleh, who died before even reaching the hospital due to internal bleeding. This is contrary to what was reported at the time, that he was still alive and died 4 days later in Turkey. In fact, the sources say that he was buried immediately with the utmost secrecy. Anjarini says that some point the finger at Saudi intelligence, who they accuse of having an interest in removing Saleh from the scene. However, those who blame the Saudis counter that their view is not based on mere conjecture. He adds that there are a number of strong indications that have led them to such a conclusion. Most important among them is the recent creation of the Islamic Front from a number of Islamist opposition armed groups under Saudi supervision. Riyadh's fear was that Saleh, who commanded a large number of fighters and is strongly backed by Qatar, represents a threat to their choice to lead the Islamic Front, Zahran Aloush. The sources also told the paper that leaked reports of a secret trip by Saleh to the US are in fact true, suggesting that Washington went along with the Saudi decision after concluding that they prefer Aloush. Russia's RT reports on UN Security Council condemns attack on Russian embassy in Damascus as terrorist act, after a mortar shell hit Russia's diplomatic mission compound on Thursday, killing 1 and injuring 9. RT says that the UNSC has strongly condemned an attack on Russia's Damascus embassy, describing it as an act of terrorism. It says that the diplomatic mission compound has sustained minor damage and no Russians have been injured in the attack. However, 9 Syrians, including embassy security guards, have been wounded and 1 man was killed. It adds that the Russian Foreign Ministry stressed that mortar attacks by militants in the central part of Damascus, including attacks on the territory of Russia's embassy, have become more frequent recently. Recalling the mortal shell which hit the Russian embassy in September, RT adds that in the recent months of ongoing civil war in Syria, rebels have launched a number of mortar shells into the upscale Mazraa district of Damascus, which houses many embassies and senior Syrian officials. Andrew Katz, who writes for Time magazine, takes a look at 1.1 million youngest victims of the Syrian civil war in his article, Tragedy by Numbers, The Lasting Impact of War on Syria's Children. Katz takes a look at a new report issued on the UN's refugee agency, which details the impact of war on more than 1 million Syrian children and the challenges they face trying to survive in foreign lands. Katz says at the end of October, 52% of the 2.2 million Syrians who had registered with UNHCR as refugees were children. Since March 2011, more than 385,000 swept into Lebanon, a nation of 4 million. He adds that the report, based on interviews with 106 children in Jordan and 176 in Lebanon conducted from July to October, illustrates the dire circumstances of life divorced from their homeland. In fact, some refugees opted to return to more than 2-year-old civil war rather than continue living in squalor, isolated and uneducated. Katz extracts 4 key points from the report, with the first being that even if they escaped physically unharmed, it's the image and sound of war they can't forget. Parents say children are suffering from flashbacks, sleeping troubles, bedwetting, and even speech problems. Some have become aggressive or hyperactive, and others have grown more shy or unusually quiet. The second point from the report Katz highlights is that often they feel isolated and unsafe. Lebanon and Jordan have taken in more than 60% of Syria's youngest refugees, but the newcomers have strained certain communities so much that tensions from even hospitable hosts have further compounded their immense stress and fear. The third point Katz highlights is that children are the breadwinners in many households. Since many parents either don't have proper documents or can't physically work because of age, disability or injury, children take up odd jobs in their place. Despite child labour laws, UNICEF estimates 1 in every 10 Syrian refugee children in the region is working. The last factor Katz emphasises is that for most, school is a memory or a dream. The possibility of an entire generation of uneducated children is one of refugee officials' most frightening prospects. Following the announcement of an anti-protest law in Egypt which led to the arrest and detention of 21 girls, let's take a look at what commentators are saying about the passing of the law. An opinion piece in the New York Times titled "Silencing Dissent in Egypt" likens the 5-month-old military-backed government to the Mubarak regime. The author criticises the hypocrisy of military leaders who stood aside in January 2011 when weeks of protest and sit-in vigils at Tahrir Square forced Mr. Mubarak to resign. The author added, more recently, General Sisi approvingly cited even larger street protests against Mr. Morsi as his main justification for the July 3rd military coup. The new Egyptian protest law specifies that all gatherings of more than 10 people should seek advance government approval. It also bans overnight sit-ins and protests in places of worship. This could signal trouble ahead, as the author writes. The new restrictions also give security forces the right to ban political campaign meetings, a provision that could be used to silence criticism of the constitution scheduled to be voted on in January. The author added, the Egyptian regime claims that the only opposition to its increasingly repressive rule comes from Muslim Brotherhood diehards. However, as the author notes, much opposition to the military comes from the secular left, which welcomed Mr. Morsi's downfall. Regarding the American reaction to the situation in Egypt, the author writes, Washington has struggled to find an effective policy response. The Obama administration was right to suspend the delivery of some American weapons systems to Egypt and to hold up some of this year's planned military aid. Although John Kerry later added that the Egyptian transition to democracy seems to be on track. The author sees that Washington has realised it will need General Sisi as a regional ally in the same way it saw Mubarak. The author concluding, Egypt may well be doomed to repeat the mistakes of the Mubarak era, but American policy need not be. Osman al-Sharnubi has written an analysis for Ahram Online titled Tuesday's Arrests Reveal Divisions in Power, saying that the new protest law has created a rift among the supporters of Egypt's current interim government. The law was enacted on Sunday and has resulted in various protests and a backlash from political groups and figures close to the government, showing a serious rift among supporters of the interim authorities for the first time since the ouster of Mohamed Morsi this summer. The crackdown was intended to target mainly Muslim Brotherhood supporters, but the author writes that many of the activists detained were by police on Tuesday, were members of parties in power or allied with the government. Members of the Egyptian Social Democratic Party have objected to the passing of the law, calling it repressive. Some of those detained for protesting were party members. The author added, Minister Ziad Bahar ad-Din, who is also deputy head of the ESDP, has long been opposed to the law. He announced in October that political and rights groups he met with had said that a repressive protest law would not be publicly accepted. According to the author, sources in the government told Ahram Online that a proposition is being discussed that the law be suspended until a wider discussion on it is carried out. Members of other groups such as the leftists and the Tamarrud movement also oppose the law, while two major liberal and leftist parties who are allied with the government, the Constitution Party and the leftist Socialist Popular Alliance Party, demanded the release of the protesters detained on Tuesday and the withdrawal of the law. Farid Zahran writes for Daily News Egypt, is the protest law a turning point between two eras? Zahran writes, since 30th of June and until now, there has been a struggle between those who have united over the fall of Morsi and the Muslim Brotherhood. They are comprised of the hegemonic state movement and the democratic movement. The author speaks of al-Baradei's belief that some kind of reconciliation with the Brotherhood was possible, but adds, I am certain that the Brotherhood would never have accepted any kind of reconciliation based on a concession and acceptance of the current situation. Therefore, al-Baradei's position is irrational and illogical and did not garner any public support. The author adds, many representatives of the democratic movement did not ask for the sit-in to be dispersed violently, but to be besieged while cutting the sit-in's line of supplies and pursuing the Brotherhood's leaders, which would have led to the gradual decrease of the protesters. The author believes that there was no split over the law, as publicly believed, writing, inside the cabinet there is little struggle, despite what people believe, concerning a big conflict over proposal. The truth is that this proposal did not lead to a conflict and both Ministers of Defence and Interior supported it, adding that the proposal was agreed on by the whole cabinet. Zahran concluded, the protest law can be the thing that leads Egypt to a crossroads, but do officials realise the danger? If they do, will they worsen the situation, leading to more damage and division, or will they try to save the country from returning to al-Adli's domination? Now let's take a look at the top headlines from international papers. Moscow Times leads with the headline, Serdyukov faves criminal charges as the investigative committee opens a criminal case on suspicion of negligence against former Defence Minister Anatoly Serdyukov. The The international New York Times leads with the headline, "In Portugal, a beast of burden lives on subsidies." As it says, it's the latest threat to survival for endangered donkeys may be EU budget cuts. China's Global Times leads with the headline, "Japan, South Korea defy ADIZ as PLA fighter jets patrol East Asia Sea Air Zone." And finally, UAE's Gulf News leads with the headline, "Expo victory will drive up stocks, create more jobs as it continues to celebrate Dubai's victorious bid for Expo 2020. That was all for today. Join us again on Monday for another press review.